Hi, and welcome to the third episode of Bet on People. And today we're going to be talking about career pivots with Sirush Contractor. And for those of you that don't know him, he is an event entrepreneur that runs Project Muziki Limited, a company dedicated to corporate and commercial events. He is a corporate leader that has worked and consulted with popular fintech and e commerce brands with his expertise in sales, corporate strategy, business development, and marketing. He is also a YouTube content creator and runs a channel called Aur Bata, which is a passive learning and motivational platform that interviews industry leaders and pioneers from different fields. He is also the co founder of That 2020 Show, which is a game show based corporate recreational module aimed at rekindling employee engagement, even in remote working environments. Wow, I couldn't have memorized that even if somebody paid me to. That is a very long and impressive bio to have. I mean, I'm amazed. How do you even find time to do everything? Or I guess everything is happening simultaneously for you, right?
It is. It's basically how you juggle with everything, yeah, right? And like in addition to all personal and professional responsibilities, having your side hustles and all of that is just about, it's at the end of the day, it's a labor of love. So if you love what you're doing, you can do it. I know I've started with the most cliche thing ever on this podcast, but that's what
That's
it is,
fine.
and more cliches coming up.
We love
So
cliches. We love cliches. We've gone through every cloud has a silver lining and all of that. And I think what we've realized, I think what I've realized over the course of this is that those exist for a reason, right? Like those cliches exist. And you can say so much with that just one line. And like you said, it's a labor of love. So we do want to get into your excellent time management and project management skills. But do you want to take us back to the beginning? Where did it all start?
um, So for me, it started off with um, necessity being the mother of invention, so to say, because I wanted to earn a little bit of cash while I was studying in Hong Kong, and I wanted to do something on the side. And having experimented a bunch of avenues, I had a few friends, and we put our minds together to starting an event company there. And that was a very rejuvenating experience because ever since I was in school, I was taught, all right, you know what, this is your whole idea that you have to be uh, good at studies. And I put that in air quotes because there are a lot of ways to define that with so many different fields and so many different fields of study opening up. Um, so anyway, I was a techie, I was a science guy who was suddenly enjoying a very different aspect of life. And it wasn't so much about the events. It was more about doing market studies, more about scouting the competition, more about trying to get my hands on pricing, trying to get around the business side of things more than anything else. And that gave me a kick because I never once imagined loving it that much. I thought, okay, this is something like financial intelligence you learn in life, either with experience or, through Khan Academy, like was really popular at the time. So I was like, okay, maybe that's how you learn about things. And that's the kind of, but this whole thing sort of put me in a situation where I was so thrilled to learn it, relearn it, relearn it, and do everything I could to try come up with better solutions business wise for myself. And that translated to everything else for me, right? And um, I realized this very, very recently. And by very recently, I mean like at least say around 3 to 4 years ago, tops, where I felt like initially was about events. But then I realized that my expertise lies in a skill and not in a field, right? And that really opened up my avenues to doing newer things, and that really helped me realize what my potential is and how I can apply it to different fields. So I think that's the story for the beginning. Yeah.
So, when you decided to start this events company, how were you able to stress test the idea? How did you know that, okay, I have this idea and this makes sense and there is a market for it, right? So, you did talk about all of the research that went into it and how you were enjoying that process. So, how did you stress test that idea then, and how would you do it today?
There are some common factors and parameters that you need to take into account when you're trying to launch up a solution that exists, but you want to stand out from the competition, right? We weren't inventing anything new. It's not like we were giving an alternate solution. It was the same solution in terms of an event, but packaged and repackaged to maybe stand out. So, what do you do in that scenario, right? First thing you do is you look at demographic, you then look at pricing, you then look at quality, right? And I'm not in that order. I mean, I would stress on quality more than anything else. Uh, we assessed all of these three factors for that particular market, for that particular demographic. So, to put it simply, there were a bunch of events in Hong Kong then that were of a decent quality. I wouldn't say the best quality, but a decent quality in addition to being overly expensive, uh, because of reasons that culminated to a lot of vendors being paid, a lot of payments being stuck in the market, and so on and so we streamlined the situation for us by making the events local, by making them affordable, by making them simple, not wanting to scale up too quickly, because in the 3 years that we did events together, we scaled up, I feel, in a very natural and organic way rather than wanting to boom up. It started just with small camping trips and university events, all the way then going up to, like, a event with say 10,000 people, right? So that scale needs to be achieved very organically, right? So for me to stress test the idea, I started small. And more than a stress test, I would much rather not even call it a prototype event, or not even want to put it in those confines of, okay, this is my lab rat for the rest of my company. Because even in that, I was trying to establish my own brand, right? Even in that, we were trying so hard to put ourselves on the map, because these were great events with very simple ideas at a low cost. At the end of the day, you go to any industry and you do this, it makes a lot of sense. For me, it was exciting because it was my first hustle ever. So then I was like, okay, listen, if I can provide a solution that's cheap and cool, why not, right? So um, it's very standard and it was very foolproof because it's common to every market, in my opinion. So that was my initial sort of hunch on the whole thing.
So it was industry agnostic. So you really didn't have to narrow it down to one particular industry because it could be applied to several. I think at this point it would be also great if we could clarify why Hong Kong. So you were doing a degree in Hong Kong, right?
I was doing my bachelor's in Hong Kong, and it was one of those things where, so I was studying in Indonesia for the longest time. I finished my high school there, and then I was like, okay, ab kidhar jana hai, right? Because I was like, I have to, go to the place that gives me the best kind of scholarship, and uh, my university in Hong Kong did exactly that. So yeah, that was there. And then, of course, that was around the time when Hong Kong was the most expensive city to live in. And side hustles were a necessity, not an additional. I wouldn't call it a side hustle. So it was one of those things. Good part was, my university didn't have that attendance ka jhanjat. So I used to focus a lot on my stuff as well. So that was.
That 75% attendance honestly killed me. Absolutely. I used to be this goody two shoes kind of student in first year. And then I realized, wait, I think I'm just going to meet the minimum attendance requirement. And that's about it, right? And go do other things. But how do you stress test ideas today, like what you did back then compared to now, what would you do differently if you had to start an events company in Hong Kong now?
It's again the way you market a service, right? See, there's it's a very different process in trying to stress test a product and stress testing a service, right? So when it comes to stress testing a product, you can do a bunch of focus groups, you can do a lot of questionnaires, you can do this, you can do that. It's like because it's tangible, right? There's a lot more you can do testing wise. There's a lot more accreditation you can get not only from the market but also from experts. When it comes to events, okay, it's hugely subjective, okay, in terms of now even today, if I say quality of events, what I used to do back in 2013 2014 is not current now, right? So for me now, the one aspect I would like to stress test is innovation, because especially in COVID times, with the entire event industry, now that I've also got an event company in India, um, the whole game is basically who can be more adaptable and who can innovate the fastest, right? Uh, so my idea would be to generate a solution and then do mocks with the audience that I already have in terms of my loyal audience, right? At the end of the day, because I think that's what a few event companies did, right, coming out of the whole lockdown situation. Um, they did a lot of virtual events. They did VR virtual events. They did 4K resolution events, blah, 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 blah. Something as simple as a Zoom meeting, right? uh, Taken to the next level is, I feel, a great solution. But again, like the whole idea is how do you create that ambience, right? Because half the event is is the ambience. Um, so again, I think like as an industry, we are all still innovating. We are all still trying to stress test our ideas. Some people do it either, by launching events straight up. Like again, the idea of stress testing an event isn't formal yet, or I don't think there's any way to make it formal, because events being services as ideas to sort of leak out is that much easier, right? It's so easy to give out an innovative event idea that you've got because someone else somewhere may have the right kind of funding and the right kind of backing to actually execute your event. And there's little to no credit that you can at the end of the day get for it. So trying to move an idea to implementation has a lot to do with how much you get funded and who are the stakeholders in the whole thing. So to stress test that, again, you need that kind of significant backing and the right kind of people to actually put it in the market. So most people don't necessarily stress test the idea; they just implement it. And for sponsors and investors, it's a gamble. It's like, okay, you launch this event into the market. There are a bunch of reggae events happening in Goa around the time Sunburn came back, and those were one of those sort of events, right, where they wanted to feed off the demographic that came to Sunburn. And that plan, as simple and straightforward as that sounded, that did backfire. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a stress test idea in the event industry. Having said that, with me, I do research by talking to people. That's my idea. If people seem excited to buy into the idea, my ultimate question is, would you pay X amount to have an experience like this? Ultimately, be it the hospitality industry, be it the event industry, be it the F&B industry, be it any industry where a product or a service is not renewable, you're paying X amount of money for a limited time duration's worth of satisfaction at the end of the day. So my question at the end of the day boils down to this, and this is what I talk to people about, right? People from the industry are potential consumers, everyone, and I want to make this personal, right? I want to get to understand one-on-one where the trends are at, what people are thinking right now, so that even if I don't have to scrap my idea, I can make tweaks that fit the sort of market, right? So for me, it's just trying to understand what people want at the end of the day, asking the right questions, and the main question, being, would you pay this much money for this kind of a service, right? Um, Having said that, I also feel like people in the event industry particularly go through a lot of creative conflicts in their mind, because when you're trying to make or curate an event from scratch, majority of the events, by the way, that you get, at least in the Indian market and even in Hong Kong, are just on the level of a vendor or an arbitrary stakeholder. But when you're curating your own event and you're organizing it, there's a huge conflict in terms of where you want to go with it creatively versus what the demographic would actually want and require. Sometimes you need to scale down, sometimes you need to scale up, and you as a creative individual need to have that business mindset then to make tweaks, which is, I know, contrary to what a lot of people would say about creative people and how creative people work, because they're not out there to immediately please people. They focus on niche audiences that appreciate the service or product for what it is. But when you are in the business of, crudely put it, making money, you need to be able to be adaptable and listen to the feedback that is being given in your stress tests. So that's how I would go about it, Sneha. I don't know if I've answered the question, but I
No,
think I've
you've
covered
done a great
a
job,
lot of things.
and in fact, you answered a lot of my follow-up questions as well. And you also brought up a very interesting point about how creativity and profitability can often be a conflict, and not just for a business. I think even for you as an individual, you have to sort of understand that with your at a YouTube channel, or even the marketing job that you do, you have to sometimes rein yourself in because it might not appeal to the target audience, right? So you always have to keep the invisible audience in mind, know what they want, and act on it. Whereas somebody who is, I mean, even artists are generally managed by labels, right? So they do have to don some sort of a persona that appeals to their niche audience or like a massive audience, right? So for you to start this company and you did it with your friends, I think it was a great learning experience for you. And I think you enjoyed the process as well, because I can tell that you're like super passionate about it. What made you then decide to do the next thing? Like, what was the next jump, and how do you decide, okay, it's time to do that?
So for me, honestly, like after I came back to India, that was around the time when I said, "Ek event company kiya, let's do another one." Right. So I was in that mindset, and that's what I was talking about, right? Where I thought events was the thing, right? I thought it was industry specific. But then I said, for me to join an event company and try building an audience right from the ground up wouldn't make a lot of sense. Because in terms of locations, India is massive, right? And in terms of tastes, people are so vastly different, right? So it's just that much more difficult for me to wrap my head around what people like and what people want, especially in a market where they would be willing to pay a lot of money for a few days worth of whatever. So that is the time bomb that set off in my head, and I was like, okay, what do I do next? If I go through the whole events thing again, if I join an event company, I'm going to join right at the bottom, and I pretty much know how to do everything. So what's the next best industry to explore? And that's how I got into the travel industry, and I started working with STC, uh, which when I had joined, it was independent, but now it comes under the whole Fairfax Limited group with SOTC and Thomas Cook under the same umbrella, and so on and so forth. Again, my whole idea was people are willing to pay 2-3 lakhs of rupees for 10-15 days per person, and I'm like, wow, that's lucrative, right? Because this is the same audience that would pay crores for a wedding, right? That's the sort of backtrack I did. And I said to myself, because I was mostly into corporate events in Hong Kong, and commercial events for that matter, but I wasn't doing too many sort of personal events, right? And I said, what if I get into that here? That would make a lot of sense. Um, and that's the industry I tried targeting first, right? The wedding industry and the occasions industry, basically. And uh, that was the whole idea of me getting into the travel industry. But again, not only did that expose me to a potential audience for my company, and not only did that give me an insight into the psyche of these guys, it gave me a picture of how Indian corporates work. And I think that's most important, to understand the industry you work in, because you go 100 kilometers in any direction, and the way the event industry works in that particular place changes completely. A lot of things in smaller towns are um, highly localized and highly labor intensive, whereas a lot of automation has come into events in tier one cities. So it's best to understand how corporates work, how a system works, and how Indian professionals think. I think that's what SATC's whole experience also helped me, because I joined right at the bottom and I managed to become a branch in charge by the time I was getting out. And throughout that, I understood um, very well what ticks people off, what makes them want to do something, what makes them want to shirk it away, what are spending capacities for that demographic that works in terms of working professionals, what are the things they like to do, what is the culture they follow. Because I had been away from India for a good part of 10 to 12 years, right? So I had to reconnect with everything in India, including how people work, uh, on a professional level. So for me, all those things sort of were very enriching with the whole SPC experience, and I got to learn so much about the people and the place I was in. That was the next step for me.
That's amazing. I think what you said makes so much sense. Travel is an adjacent industry to events, and you sort of have a audience overlap going there. So did you have the next step in mind? Because when you're talking about it, it looks like you did have that thought that this audience that I'm sort of building now or researching now is eventually going to be my audience for the events company that I set up.
For sure. See, the main, I think, benefit of me being with the event company was that I was a customer facing group, which helped me make a lot of great connects with people who would be into a product or an idea that costs a lot. Um, Ultimately, the event industry works on margins that are too small. So you would always want to get bigger events to be able to make a lot of money. Uh, you can look at it as a percentage scale sort of a thing, where you are sure to make 10 to 15% out of a particular deal, right? And this is like super ballpark. But so the bigger your ticket size, the more you basically end up making, right? So uh, yes, to answer your question, yes, it was always the next step, right? So right, the very second I got off the plane in India, I was like, okay, gotta do an event company, gotta do an event company. Um, I think I was extremely patient in wanting to do it, because it's a huge difference between being excited and enthusiastic about an idea and then pulling the trigger on it at the right time. So I think this whole period that I got with SOTC gave me tons of exposure, and I think after that was the right sort of time for me to do it, because um, in retrospect, between 2017 and 2020, there's like good part of 2.5 to 3 years, and that was what I really needed to establish myself in the industry. So I think it was great timing as well, right? I did that well before COVID. But in any case, for me, I think, yeah, that was always the idea. That was always the plan. So what I was saying was that, it was that kind of a relationship where, something would happen in Europe in the middle of the night and they'd call me up because I would be the guy that sort of was their on point guy. And that was the kind of relationship I had with them, and that really translated into my business. That's sort of what I was going through. Yeah.
Great. So there is a master plan, and then you sort of have like strategies to get there, and then you put that into action. And you also talked about knowing when to pull the trigger. I think that that's super important. So do you have, or did you have some sort of a metric in mind that if I spend, let's say, X number of years, or if I have X number of connections, or if I generate X amount of revenue, then it's time for me to sort of make the next jump?
To be very honest, I feel like when you're doing this with your life, right? And I'm being very general when I sort of say this, being very loose when I make this statement. Uh, you have to understand that it's a two-step process. Step one is making the most of the skill you already or skills you already possess. And step two is basically building onto your skill-based resume, right? I don't know if you've heard of Peter's principle, right? Because that's, I think, one of the core competency metrics across the world, and that's basically the building blocks of how hiring happens and how um, you basically consider people for promotions and so on and so forth. I think is built on that core idea without people really realizing it, right? So Peter's principle basically says um, you will keep progressing and getting promoted in your particular professional life up until the point that you don't have skills for the next level. So if you are to put it in a very simple way, right? If I start at an executive level in any company and I want to get to senior executive, then maybe a manager, then maybe a senior manager, then maybe a director, so on and so forth. If I want to climb that ladder, automatically I will stop at one particular level and stagnate if I don't have the skills required to go to the next level. Which basically means that if you have a target in mind that, okay, I want to be at this level in my life professionally, you need to prepare for what you require then. You are basically like, it's one of those things where you dress for the job you want, right? It's, you are trying to groom yourself for the job you want. You're trying to groom yourself for the position you want to be in. So even when you're at an executive level and you're eyeing a position that you really want to be, look at the job description, look at look at what the role entails, listen to people in that position, listen to what they do, listen to what skills they have, or what nuances they may bring into processes that make all the difference. At the end of the day, it's all about one pinch of salt here and there maybe, and that makes all the difference. So for me, when I was doing this whole master plan, I realized that there were skills I had to pick up along the way. If I did not make those connects, if I was not personable to an Indian audience, especially the kind that I wanted to target, if I didn't understand their references, even with the YouTube channel that comes in much later on, if I don't understand the trends, if I don't understand what the differences in terms of the mindsets between Gen Y, Gen X, Gen Z is, if I don't see or learn the ability to talk to nobody in front of me, if I don't do those things, I can't make it. So there's always an if and but attached to a particular job. So if I were to take the Peters principle and put it to my own life, here's how it goes. I achieved everything that I had the skills for. That's step one. I lived up to the potential that I wanted to live up to, or I could. To increase that potential, I kept working on these different aspects of my life that enabled me to go to the next level and then fulfill that potential and then keep moving forward. It's always a sort of thing where it's like a crop rotation thing, right? You have to till the soil that you're currently on, but also plow the field next to you. So it was almost always like that for me. Getting those connects, being in that mindset, pulling the trigger at the right time was when I understood fully that I got this. There were metrics, there were numbers, right? So for me at the time, I realized I would just go very simply with the pair to ratio. There's no crazy math to this, right? 80% of my business is going to come from 20% of my customer base. Very simple, which basically meant 500 customers if I had, I would get what, 100 customers to do events. 100 events, even if I span them out in 2 years, is quite a bit of money, especially with the kind of client that I had. So I was like, okay, that sounds good. 500 seems fair, right? And I'm not talking about 500 contacts, like I've called 500 people and I've booked 500 people. No, I meant 500 customers that were happy with 500 customers that knew me by name Sid, not Shidush. 500 customers who, if they had to return to some place, or like if they had a new travel inquiry, I'd be the first one they'd call, right? 500 customers that I solved problems for on ground, and they appreciated it and they know, even if they don't verbalize it, they know it, right? And as a result of that, I had 500 customers who, inadvertently would send me a good morning, good evening, good afternoon WhatsApp message at least once a week. So I think that was it for me. I said, if these guys have vested interest, if I have 500 people who can vest their interest in someone like me, I think I can do. And that's exactly what happened. So for me, I really enjoyed the process of doing that. Again, to be able to do that, I had to learn a lot of things about culture, about people, about specific to the region, because I was operating out of Gujarat at the time. So I had to learn how people in Gujarat think. When I was branch in charge, I was moved to Ahmedabad. So people from my original city to Ahmedabad, like again, huge difference. So, you know, honing that skill of understanding people and looking right through them when they're sitting in front of you, judging their body language, understanding what they're saying by tone, by words. I think those are things that you learn with experience, and those are things you need to focus on. It's intuitive, but it needs a little bit of attention. The more you look at it, the better you get. The more you observe, the better you get. So that was basically that. All of that put together culminated to me knowing, okay, I'm gonna pull the trigger now, right? So, and also again, like events is a seasonal business. So if you want to pull the trigger, you want to do it well before your season begins, right? Which is your September, October, which is the wedding season, basically kicks off in full swing. So you want to do it well before that, so that you have your vendors ready, you have all your stakeholders ready, you have investors if you need any, you have all that in place, and then you basically, kickstart when the season starts, you're ready to go. So that was also sort of part of the process in knowing when to pull the trigger.
So, Sidhush, it sounds like there are two things at play here. One is obviously the data that you collect, both quantifiable and qualitative. And the second thing is your own intuition, right? Because you can't treat data as insights. Those aren't insights. That is just data, and you can look at it the way that you want to look at it. We know how studies get manipulated. And honestly, if we were to have a debate about anything right now, I really don't want to bring up anything polarizing, but even something as simple as, is global warming real? And I'm sure you could find arguments for and against the topic, right? Just to be clear, I think, no, I know that global warming is real. I shouldn't have said I think. And I definitely understand that climate change is happening. So just to be sure that nobody's going to come after me after this, but um, what I wanted to sort of summarize is, there's data, there's intuition, and there's, I think what you explained so well is just you having this, you knowing that these are the skills that you want to learn, acquire, and then you go learn them or you acquire them. But at what point do you think, are you also then your own biggest self-critic? Because how do you assess that the new skills that you've acquired, you've mastered them, right? So So just to put that in perspective, the skills that you already have, you're using them at your job, and you know that you're doing a great job at it, right? But the new skills that you've learned, right? How do you know that you've mastered them?
So I think I was listening very recently to Daniel, who happens to be the CEO of Kind Foods, right? Uh, Huge brand, by the way, one of my ideas, to be very honest. But um, so he said something which I sort of had already hashed out, but he put it in a very sort of memorable way. He talked about three C's, right? And there was basically, first thing is you develop creative in terms of what you want to do or what your idea is. He was speaking more in terms of startups and entrepreneurs, but I'm talking more in terms of just anything you want to do in life. First, to develop creative, right? So if I'm talking about a skill, how am I going to acquire it? The process of actually acquiring it. All that comes into your first C, that is creative. The next thing is being a critic, where you have to keep criticizing what you may or may not do wrong. And both of these things actually go hand in hand, because while you're doing your creative process, you keep encountering situations where, with all the reading and all the study and all the experiences you have, qualifiable or not, you end up in situations where you don't know what to do. Circumstances can be different from here and there. It's on a spectrum, right? So when you find yourself on a spot in the spectrum which you don't entirely understand, you know for yourself that you need to work on it, right? And after the second C, once you're completely critiquing yourself and you think you have mastered it well enough to go out there and execute whatever you have to do based on those skills, you become a crusader. So it's creative, critic, crusader. I think that's a beautiful way of putting it. But with me, the way I look at it, it's very simple. You just need to be honest with yourself, right? A lot of people believe in self affirmation, and a lot of people believe in negative reinforcement. So it's like literally two sides on that scale, which basically people try and balance out, and at the end of the day, try to give themselves a good mix between the positive and the negative reinforcement. Sometimes saying you've got this is good. Sometimes telling yourself no is also good. For me, I just feel like the feedback I give myself shouldn't averse me and shouldn't make me want to crave more either. So I have to be completely unbiased and honest with myself without feeling anything about it. It's like literally going to someone who's an expert and them telling you, hey, listen, I have some feedback. You can't take it personally. In the exact same fashion, if you're critiquing yourself, you can't take it personally. You can't attach emotions to your own conscience. That's something I feel will slow you down in the long run, because you want to go in one direction, but not being entirely honest with yourself, and not taking that honesty well, is only going to deviate you from your goal at the end of the day. It can be something as simple as how your company's logo looks. If you think something is going to sell, you're going to go with that. You're not going to attach emotions to, oh, but what if this is the. I am terrible at naming companies. I think even Project Muziki was an experience where I was like, I'm too emotionally attached to it. But eventually, I was lucky enough to be in an industry where I didn't really need to perfect a name, right? I just needed presence. I needed regular events. I needed decent B2B presence and decent B2C presence if needed. That was it for me. So I didn't really have to outsell myself based on my personal sort of company's branding. But had that been the question, I would have been ultra critical with myself, and I would have really pushed myself to do something honestly, and I would have told myself, Sid, listen, thoda zyada hota hai. Nahin, no. So I think at the end of the day, it's about how honest you are and how you take your honesty, right? You are your own critic, right? Because you can have a million walls uh, around you to blockade opinions, to blockade feedback, to blockade a lot of things from outside you. but what you feel within, there's only so far you can run from it. So you need to be your own critic. At the end of the day, you are the only stakeholder of your own life. You're the only one who knows best for yourself at the end of the day. So like, it's one of those things where I might sound slightly spiritual even though I'm not, but you're born alone, you die alone. So you have to sort of take charge of your own life and be your own critic, so that then when you pitch it to someone, even if it's your partner in crime next sitting right next to you, you have already gone through those initial 10-20 filters that you had in your mind. That's already a pre-refined idea that you have. Then you listen to the feedback from everywhere else, again go back, introspect, and then come out again. So it's just how much you keep straining your puree and how smooth it becomes at the end of the day, right? That's, I think that's the most important part about all of this. You can't go through the creative critic crusader phase without doing the creative critical and crusader phase as well. The crusader phase is about execution and implementation, and I think you cannot learn that in business school depending on what your product or service is. For me, in events, you definitely can't learn something like this in any school that is out there. But your creative phase, again, is highly personal, right? It's something that appeals to you, may appeal to the audience, so on and so forth. Coming up with the idea is brilliant, right? A couple of people sitting down for drinks can come up with a great idea without knowing how much the price tag on that really is. It is in the critical phase that you can really properly work on yourself methodically, and that's the phase that you have control over completely, right? To be honest with yourself, it sounds really simple, I know that, but it's so difficult to do that. People um, tend to love the fact that they've gotten a great product and tend to hate the fact that they haven't made it yet. And the more we try and normalize success and failure both in frequencies where there can be success, there can be failure, but life goes on, the more we normalize that aspect of being critical about yourself, the more honest we'll be with ourselves and the better we'll be taking our own. So I think that's the sort of thing for me.
I mean, wow, I wouldn't even know where to start with all of that. And I love the fact that this is slowly becoming a spiritual podcast right now. But it's so true. Like these limiting beliefs that you may have, it can hold you back. And at the same time, words of affirmation can help you have a positive mindset about things. But that's not enough. Like you said, you have to also be in a shoot first mentality, if you will, where you act on those beliefs, right? So I can't just sit here and be like, oh, I wish I could do this or I wish I could do that. I may not have the skills. I could learn them, but then if I'm not really implementing them, or like you said, if I'm not being my own critic, right? Because I do that. I go back and I like, oh, this isn't right and that isn't right. And hopefully every podcast that I do, I make those changes. So it is definitely very important for you to be honest with yourself. And I think a lot of people struggle with that, right? Because when you get into this sort of comfort zone, you go on, you go in, you go on autopilot, right? You really aren't thinking too much about things. Everything becomes like a conditioned reflex. Like when you tie your shoes, you don't think about whether the right lace is over the left, right? So you couldn't tell. And it's very difficult to sort of break out of that and view yourself as an entity that exists. That sort of self-awareness, it's very difficult to sort of have, and you have a lot of that, honestly. So is it also the books that you're reading on the side or the people that you're meeting that help you have this mindset, or is it just the process of doing these things on your own and grinding that sort of develop this mindset for you?
There's a question that a lot of people keep debating whether you should ask yourself or not. And a lot of people say if you ask yourself this question, it's going to slow you down. And a lot of people say it's only going to take you deeper into your own sort of journey and make you realize what you really want to achieve. And the question is, what's the point? You ask yourself this question, right? Like, what's the point of doing this? Why am I doing this, right? The minute you start asking this question to yourself in any context, right, you stop yourself and you stop it yourself to reflect at everything that you are currently. And it's not about weighing your pros and cons. It's not about weighing, oh, what I'm doing is this. This is the quantifiable aspect of it. This can be the quality of this. This can be, you're not assessing. You're not doing a SWOT analysis in your head. You're only reflecting on everything and asking yourself if you're happy, if you are genuinely and truly satisfied with what you're doing in your life today, right now. If you've woken up in the morning, slept at night, loved everything in the middle, or loved at least most of it in the middle, right? Because that's something a lot of people would be very happy, right? Then I think you're doing the right thing. But the question is really, how often should you ask yourself what the point really is? Because for me, this whole self reflection process of asking myself if I'm doing the right thing, if I'm on the right track, if I have the skills I need, if I'm happy with where I am today versus if not where I want to be ahead, just comes from me realizing what this question kept doing to me. Because when I was back in Hong Kong and I was studying and I was trying to do events, and I never woke up 8 a.m. in the morning for a lecture, but I would stay late till 5 a.m. in the morning till my event wrap up was done. And every time I'd ask myself, what's the point? Right? What's the point? Why am I doing this at 5 a.m. in the morning when 8 a.m. in the morning is not something I do for something else? Um, it unfurls when you try and get in touch with what you really are and who you really want to be, uh, which may not entirely be a different person or a different far off distant goal. But when you come close and think about the little tweaks, the little changes that would have made all the difference in your day, you can't let that go. That weighs on your conscience, knowing that, oh, listen, I could have done this today, but I didn't. Even if it's something you enjoy doing versus something you should have otherwise done, right? Even if you finished most of your work and you wanted to get in a good night's sleep and you tucked yourself in a little early and it weighs you down. That's not a clear conscience at the end of the day. You're not happy. Even if you enjoy doing what you're currently doing, you're not happy with what you had to do. So sometimes asking yourself this question about what's the point, in my opinion, I think is great. But at the same time, you have to develop um, an inner circle for yourself, right? You have to develop uh, a sounding board, right? Who don't just want you to hear the things they want you to hear, who will nod, ask you questions, and then go ahead and make you realize, oh, wait, I didn't ask myself this question. Back to the drawing board, right? It's very important to have that inner circle. Uh, I found that in my girlfriend, few friends of ours, a lot of people. For a lot of aspects of my life, it's my family as well. Um, it's just there are things you have to process within yourself to be able to take criticism, to be able to take that feedback, to be able to build a trust where a close friend heavily criticizes you and you say, all right, you know what, maybe there's something. And that again comes with being highly secure with yourself. Again, coming back to the same point, if you ask yourself what's the point and you're not happy with what you're currently doing, you shouldn't be averse by that, right? You shouldn't be completely demotivated by that. Or if you're entirely happy, you shouldn't be complacent about it. You should be in a position where you're like, okay, this is where I'm right now, right? I'm absolutely equanimous with which position I'm in right now. Is there a position I want to be in? And what can I do to get there? Being objective with yourself in that kind of a sense helped me a lot. Right? So that was something I kept doing. where I wanted to ask myself this question of, am I doing all right? Right. And even if I wasn't doing something that I felt I was doing right, I kept my calm. I didn't lose it. I worked on it. I used my inner circle as a sounding board, and they helped me a lot with a lot of things. And that's how I've done everything I have done. People ask me, uh, आप कौन से इंडस्ट्री से हो, right? People ask me, what's your background? मैं बोलता हूँ, सर मेरा ग्रोथ एंड बिजनेस डेवलपमेंट का बैकग्राउंड है, मैं सेल्स एंड मार्केटिंग वाला हूँ. But they are not satisfied with that, because to them it's industry specific, whereas what I've done is I've gone around, touched every industry with the skills I've got, and done great, because I've just followed the exact same process that I always follow. It's about, again, being very, very critical with myself, and then asking myself if I'm doing it right and what's the point at the end of the day. And then asking all these. Do I read a lot? Yeah, I do. But again, it's one of those things where you don't entirely get influenced by what you read. There needs to be a barrier between that as well. You need to know what works for you, what is relevant to your surroundings and your setting culturally in terms of place, time, and milieu of where you are. Um, you need to understand what applies to you as a person, because I can very well imagine reading, I don't know, any random book. Like I would very much read Angels and Demons and be like, oh, that's interesting. Maybe I should also, not getting into the cult aspect of it, but it just, a lot of books that make it big and a lot of books that are good have this ability to influence you and make you think. You should still have your own sort of personality in it and look at things. And this is how we consume all media. So yes, while a lot of what I read has influenced the way I think, um, like when I was very young, I was introduced to books about nihilism, and that sort of had a huge impact on me. And then I realized, hey, listen, maybe I'm not that, right? Maybe I am a little more compassionate than I think I am. So you need to have your own core persona, and you need to be very secure with that. And to not be influenced by anything so greatly as to, completely change who you are. You need to grasp what you need to grasp and then move ahead. Again, be as critical with the media you consume. And I always say this, being a content creator, be as critical with the media you consume as you are with, yourself, or as you should be with yourself. So I think I sound like I'm repeating myself, but it's all about that. It's all about being honest and, being critical with yourself and taking it well.
No, I love the fact that you're summarizing it, and also your ability to remember parts of my long and convoluted question, right? I mean, kudos to that. And I was kind of sort of wondering about where did this question even come from? What's the point? But then I think you explained it. I think nihilists watching this would love this question, but it could also send somebody into an existential crisis. I know it did for me for a very long time, right? When I was asking myself, what's the point? Why am I doing this? Why am I even here? What is my purpose? And for so long, I was like a dog chasing cars. I was just so caught up with that question itself, like what is my purpose? And I would ask everybody I met that question, and obviously nothing satisfied me because that was their purpose, right? I couldn't have somebody else's purpose become mine. And to be honest, I haven't figured it out. I don't know what is life. I really don't know why we are here, right? But that shouldn't stop me from doing the things that I know I want to do. And maybe I'll figure it out. Maybe I won't figure it out. I mean, who knows? But I think the point of checking in with yourself and asking yourself, hey, I mean, is this what you want to be doing right now? Or like you said, why do you have the enthusiasm and the energy to do something till 5 in the morning when you don't want to get up for an 8 a.m. class, right? So it's about this, there's almost like a dual thing, right? There are things that are expected of you and you do them, and versus the things that you actually want to do. where I think a lot of people sort of they understand themselves and they are critical, and they have their own individual identity, but they also crave acceptance from society, right? And we always have these trends where like we're normalize this, normalize that. And in my head I'm thinking everything is normal, right? Every person, every personality that you have, I'm not saying that we're really special, because we are truly insignificant when you think about the size of the universe. But to be honest, why is it that you need to be accepted by other people that you necessarily won't even go to advice for, and you sort of use that to either feel good about yourself or not, like you seek validation, right? So what you said about having this inner circle and having that sounding board, I think is so important. Those are the people that truly know you, and their opinion should matter. Everything outside of that, you have to filter it out. Some of it will be just pure noise, and some of it will be insights. And you have to also, like you said before, be very impersonal about the feedback that you're getting. And people, I think people also have a very hard time giving feedback, because they use this sort of like a sandwich approach where they say one good thing about you, then say one bad thing, and then sandwich it and they just round it off. Yeah. And they're always like so apologetic about giving feedback, right? And when I feel like you should be enthusiastic about giving feedback, if obviously the feedback is constructive and the other person is willing to hear it. I so appreciate what you told me about the podcast and the mic and that all of that, because that's how I'm going to learn, right? So if I look at my ability to learn things and do things, I only have 24 hours in a day. How am I going to use all of that to learn everything out there? I need somebody who's done it before or who's doing it to tell me, hey, there's a better way of doing this. And I so truly appreciate that. And I realize I've been talking for a long time, and I definitely want to hear about your event company. So after you did your stint with the travel company, was that the next step? You started your own event company. Great. So what that's called Musiki. Am I pronouncing that right?
That's right. That's right.
And where does the word come from? I know you said that you didn't really want to fall in love with the word and it doesn't really matter, but where does it come from?
It was basically Swahili for music. And the company was basically started with the idea that we would primarily do music events. Like that was initially one of the many things that we wanted to diversify into. Um, but of course, we had to make an entry into the market, and we did that through weddings. We did that through occasions like anniversaries, birthdays, so on and so forth. Of course, we had a minimum ticket size to all of that, and we were in select venues only when we started, and then we sort of grew and expanded from there. Um, so with Muziki, what happened was basically I moved to Goa. I was like, listen, I have to be in Goa. I have to be at the epicenter of where vendors are available everywhere, right? Like for the rest of India, most of the parts, like दो घर छोड़ के एक engineer मिलेगा, यहाँ पे दो घर छोड़ के एक event वाला बंदा मिलता है, and that's great because everyone has different parts to play in the whole ecosystem. This is what I love about the event scene in Goa. It is an ecosystem of people highly codependent on each other for resources, coming together and making some of the best and some of, I would say, the most resource optimal event solutions in the country. Um, I have done events across India and done a few international events from Muziki. I have never seen something being so sleek, simple, straightforward as an ecosystem of event guys that I see in Goa. It's amazing as an event entrepreneur to me. And that would also initially mean it was that much more difficult for me to get into that web, but again, you start slow, you respect people, and a favor here, a favor there at your age. It's that sort of a situation. And um, it's lovely for me to be associated with uh, being a Goa event entrepreneur, or being associated with DJs, artist vendors, sound vendors, light vendors, staging vendors, decor guys in Goa, because they're the most flexible I have ever seen in terms of work. I tell them overnight, bhai, Hubli mein ek event hai, they'll drive down, right? I'll say, bhai, Kolkata mein event hai, they'll fly their artists. And some of the best, I special shout out to all the artist guys in Goa. We've got great local talent as well as a great ability to source international talent in Goa. Yeah. So I think Muziki wouldn't be what it is, or wouldn't have reached potentials of what it could reach if it wasn't for me being in Goa. So the way I look at it, the place helped me a lot, and the fact that there were so many thriving factors sort of helped me catapult the brand into different tier one cities and tier two cities of India. Uh, that was how Muziki was born, and it was very natural. I think out of all my ventures ever, this seemed like the most streamlined I have felt starting something, because there were very minimal resistances, and I felt like I had easier access to resources. So this was sort of the most convenient journey so far for me.
That's amazing. And I think what you, especially for you, the place is so important, because that allows you to access the ecosystem that you mentioned, which is amazing. So doing that back in Hong Kong versus now, do you feel like, you said that this is a very natural organic process, right? Do you feel less stressed out? Um, and do you feel like this is going in the right direction for you, or are you asking what's the point all too often?
I am. I am. So I'll break this up into pre-COVID and post-COVID, right? Because again, we're not in post-COVID, but say after COVID struck. Um, Pre-COVID, I was easily getting 2 events, 3 events a week. Again, these weren't huge events; they were small events, but uh, it was great because I had a footing. Even though I was working on small margins, I had a great footing in the market. So I was everywhere in terms of my face was recognizable. People understood me, people knew me, people knew, okay, there's a guy in the event industry. So much so that even after COVID, I didn't necessarily have to shut shop, which a lot of event entrepreneurs, especially those that are in this whole gig economy model, had to do. They had to shut shop, and they had to shut the event companies. They had to dissolve them. Investors that had a lot of money invested in some great tier one city brands for events had to pull out. Uh, Guys who were kept on retainers had their retainers shut. All of those different things happen. So for me, I didn't really feel much of a hit, to be very honest, because uh, we were again working in a situation where we used to hire guys as per project. So it was gig economy model. But so I didn't have any sort of human resource liabilities, nor did I hold inventory, because again I would outsource it. It was less stressful than it was in Hong Kong, for sure, hands down. Because in terms of the kind of competition and in terms of the vibe of the market, it's entirely and totally different, right? In Hong Kong, it's cutthroat, and it's very sort of how should I say this? Competitive in a way where, because there's a small geographical target location, everyone's fighting for the same space. Whereas in Goa, or let me generalize it and say in India, there are so many niche event spaces. Okay, there are companies, event companies that only cater to CSR events. And this happened in 2015-16 when I came across such companies, when I wasn't even in the event industry. And then when I got in, I realized there's event companies for CSR in a particular direction. So CSR events related to education only was an event company in itself. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. And when you build that kind of an ecosystem, everyone has a place in the whole jigsaw puzzle, and everything needs to come together for it to be functional. It isn't as competitive, it is way more collaborative. So it was definitely less stressful. At the same time, now post COVID, I think with how technologically inefficient certain locations in India can be, I feel like the whole virtual events thing is just not the same thing. Like for me, I did I went on to do that 2020 show, which is a game show which basically is done remotely for companies that basically want employee engagement programs. Uh, it's not the same, right? Watching Veerdas live versus watching him on a Zoom session is not the same. The atmosphere, like I always say, for every event, the ambience is half of the actual event. Uh, like I remember when we were doing events in HK Clubbing, one of the many things we tried to stress test was basically how using space could change the moods of people. So basically, how much of a dance floor there should be, or what the logistics in terms of arrangement things should look like, how much restrictive space there is. Uh, Things like that made all the difference to from people not wanting to do anything except have a drink and get out versus people wanting to dance, get drunk all night. So, and we had to find the sweet spot between that, right? For us, it was those nuances that made all the difference. So, I mean, there's not too much to experiment with the whole virtual event scene right now, to be very honest. We can invent and reinvent concepts. We can put them through the grinder and see if that actually works, and then take it forward. If you know, again, being highly critical on yourself and listening to what other people say about your particular product. So yes, I think the entire event industry as a whole is going through a stressful time right now. There's no denying that. But again, I feel like uh, we need to innovate, and we need to innovate in a way such that we feel engaged and we feel heard, and everyone feels involved in a particular process, activity, event concept, uh, and therefore are invested in it. Without that level of engagement, events will flop. Earlier, an event would mean having a great banquet hall, putting a few tables, picking the right centerpieces, and calling it a day. Whereas now we need to think about the psyche of the participants in an event much, much, much more. And we need to understand the mindsets, the flow of events way more deeply than we would have, say, 5 years ago. So, yes, for the industry, it is a stressful time. Again, with me working in Hong Kong and also working here in India, I feel like there is a lot of knowledge that I've gained from my experience in this regard because of how cutthroat it was in Hong Kong. So I'm just making the best of the experiences I learned there, bringing it here, and trying to resolve some of that stress, not only through the event company, but through the several other streams of revenue that I have. So yeah.
And
I'm
you
talking too much. Hold on. मेरे को पानी पीने दो.
no, this is all of this is great. I think that love the fact that you're bringing up so much and that it's making me, it's going to be so hard editing this, right? And you
I
promised
told
me
you
that,
you're
yeah,
gonna find it difficult to edit.
you're delivering on that. So a couple of things, right? Maybe like let's do like a rapid fire thing. Do you believe that events company or any company in general should find a niche and target that niche exclusively and just have a very curated product just for that? Or do you think that the opposite is better, where you have something which can be used and enjoyed by a lot of people? Then maybe, at some point you might think about doing that, but you're more of a generalist.
Mainstream with niche options. That's always what I say. So you develop a product or a service which caters to a mainstream, but has the option of adding on a niche, or you develop a niche which basically attracts the mainstream into the niche. But the problem with that is basically you need to uh, understand if the trend flows or the tide flows towards that niche in that particular time. Podcasting was a niche back in 2018, 2019, and in India at least. And this whole wave came around, and it's pretty much the thing to do now. So, I mean, you have to cater to the mainstream, but understand that you will have a niche audience who would want a deeper understanding. It's like people would like to go for BSc physics, but honors in mathematics wala option bhi dena acha hai. It's like one of those things. So, yeah.
Yeah, we love piling on. Okay, so the second rapid fire question is, you talked about not reinventing the wheel, which is true, but at the same time, innovating enough to recreate the ambience that you have with physical events. So, how do you juggle between that?
Um, so basically, I think the idea is to find a sweet spot at the end of the day between engagement and concept, right? Because if you have a great event concept, that's half the story. The other half of the story now, at least in a post-COVID or during COVID kind of a situation, basically is to be able to find that spot where your participants are engaging. So it could be activities, it could be personalized events, it could be basically anything to do with an interaction where the course of an event changes or highly depends on the way a particular participant reacts or the way he engages, but at the same time does not destroy the entire concept of the event. I think Clubhouse is doing that right now, right? Wherein they have a model which caters to different interests, but also allows significant amount of control as to what kind of engagement all participants can have on the same platform. Um, a lot of that was happening on Discord. Before all of this, it was all happening on Instagram lives, YouTube lives, things like that. So the point is basically to be able to engage a lot with the audience and with the participants. The challenge there basically is to not make it um, a marketing centric idea wherein you're only getting limited insights from people, but you're letting them voice their opinion, you're letting them have a space, and you're letting them fully express themselves in whatever way, shape, or fashion you can. So, like with the game show that we did, that is like the best way of going about it, because we had a game show, okay, with influencers on board um, as participants, and we used to premiere those episodes, and we had an audience who would keep interacting with us while the episode premiered. But after that, every weekend, we also did similar, if not the exact same sort of games for our audience. And a lot of times we would invite them onto our platform and so on. So it's just finding the right balance between a creative idea and the level of engagement that it could have. Is that, I think that answers.
Yeah, it does. And finally, um, how often are you asking yourself, what's the point right now after COVID?
Every day, every day, every day. If I don't ask myself this question, uh, I feel like I am not um, being honest with myself. So I think this is a constant process. Ultimately, it becomes a part of your self awareness, right? Because then you become entirely conscious about the choices you make in life, because you look at the implications and the consequences of those actions, right? They don't, and if you do it right, they don't inhibit, they don't stop you from expressing yourself, they don't stop you from being who you are. But what it does is basically allow you to be aware about every single thing and every single choice that you make. Will this help me now? Okay, if not now, will this help me in future? Okay, do you think this is something that I should be doing? Do you think the benefit outweighs the effort? Should I pursue this? Should I not pursue this? So on and so forth. So I feel like if I'm not asking myself that question every day, or in every major slash minor decision making process I need to have, um, I'm not doing well enough. Because at the end of the day, it can be as simple as, I have got 2 eggs. Should I just make an omelette today, or can I have scrambled eggs tomorrow morning? Right? From that to, should I start my own YouTube channel and how do I market it? Like, it's this and that require the exact same amount of attention and exact same amount of honesty. So I have to keep asking myself this every day. I find it highly difficult now to survive in a world where I am just going with the flow without having a purpose, without seeing a visible necessary benefit. And as to the whole existential thing that you brought up earlier, I have comforted myself in knowing there doesn't need to be a purpose. The reason we are a coexistent species and the reason we are all together in this is basically to make life easier for all of us. And the only reason we ask ourselves anything existential is because we have the intelligence for it. I would so want to see my neighbor's pet thinking to itself, मैं fish खाऊं कि नहीं खाऊं? आज क्या होगा? What's the point? Right? We have the intelligence to reflect. Doesn't mean we overuse that in trying to find purposes for ourselves. It's so simple. There doesn't need to be a purpose. The whole connotation of there being a purpose basically is, there needs to be a start, there needs to be an exposition, there needs to be a build up, there needs to be a climax, and there needs to be an anticlimax to everything in life. And without following those constructs, we are lost, because we feel, oh my god, purpose ही नहीं है, क्या करूं? अरे तो जियो ना, जो कर रहे हो, do it to the best of your ability ना, make life easier for everyone else. मैं चिप्स बनाने वाला अगर कंपनी हूं, तो मैं सोच रहा हूँ क्या, अरे व्हाट इज माय पॉइंट? अरे बंदा मस्त चिप्स खा रहा है यार, खाने दो बेचारे को. You're doing something very simple. You're making life easier for everyone around you by fulfilling your potential. खत्म. उससे ज्यादा उसके आगे सोचने का कोई जरूरत नहीं. Because again, I feel like when you stop doing that, when you stop reflecting on whether you are fulfilling your potential or not, you understand your shortcomings better and you try and work on it. You just keep becoming a better version of yourself, and for who? Not for yourself, but for everyone that is a stakeholder in your life, right from your inner circle to the end users of the product or service that you work for and work on. So it's just for everybody else's sake. Be reflective, right? Mask pehno, apne liye nahi, dusre ke liye. It's one of those situations. So yeah, every day.
No, I mean, you should do it for yourself also. And this is super crazy that you mentioned your neighbor's pet, because there's this dog that I follow on Instagram, and actually there are several now, but this dog is like the most advanced, and her name is Bunny, and she has like this entire set of buttons in front of her, and she started with learning one word and understanding the action associated with that word, and now she has like these sentences, like 3 or 4 word sentences, and she recently learned the word I. So now her questions are, I dog why? So she is going through like a full-blown existential crisis, and she also understands she's struggling to understand the concept that she is a dog and her mom is a human, right? So her mom is not a dog, but they're still a family. It's beautiful. I probably will like drop that link, but it's
I
called
used to have a pet dog. I wonder if that's what was going in his little mind. Is it's just amazing. So, like, I always feel, right, like the quest for a purpose is a byproduct of intelligence. And that's something that I feel, if the more we keep thinking and the more we intellectualize it and the less action we put to it, the deeper we get into the search for purpose. And sometimes it's counterproductive. So I don't think about purpose, I think about ability, I think about skills. So that's how I think about
I am convinced this is a simulation now because I uploaded this photo with that neon sign and the caption says focus on your ability, right? It's crazy. And also love the fact that you explained it so well with the chips analogy. I think that whenever I sort of spiral, I'm going to ask that, right? Like, is the chips company thinking, what's the point, or are they just making chips? Should maybe
it. There's a
sometimes
demand, you need a supply. Karo
exactly,
na.
exactly, and that is what, to be honest, okay, I shouldn't be plugging marketing here, but that's exactly what it is, right? And you know that you do it too. There's a demand, you harvest the demand. If there isn't one, then you can probably generate that demand, but it's always a demand and supply thing. I never thought I would be talking about the basic principles of economics after not being in love with the idea of having money at all. So for me, I was always like, chase happiness, chase happiness. Money is like a dirty thing. And now I'm like, "Wait, what the hell was I thinking even?"
That is also demand, no? Happiness ka demand hai, to supply to chahiye na.
Yeah, because
It's
I think
universal.
it almost sort of becomes like a trend, right? You have like one movie come out, which is Three Idiots, and then actually they didn't say chase happiness, they said chase success. Sorry, chase
Yes,
excellence.
brilliance,
Yeah,
excellence, success पीछा करेगी song.
and success will follow you. And I think it's the same thing. You're not really chasing money, but you also can't be in that sort of bubble where you're like, that hippie sort of life. No offense at all, but where you decide that you don't need money, or that money cannot bring you happiness. It can. It definitely can. It cannot obviously give you the ability to create relationships, or even give you the ability to help other people, in the sense where you develop that mindset that you want to help other people. But it definitely is the basis for you to sort of be in the position where you can give back to the community, right? And it's not like money then becomes your purpose. Your purpose still remains fulfilling your ability.
I honestly don't trust entrepreneurs who say we're not in it for the money. Of course, you're in it for the money. If you were, you
Yeah,
would just give it away.
I mean,
So
otherwise you
let's
just,
cut to the
yeah,
chase.
otherwise
Yeah,
you become like a not for profit thing, right? And especially right now, I think every month is, we had mental health awareness, and then we are, this is Pride Month, and everybody just jumps on the bandwagon to show that they care, that they're not really in it for the money. And then they'll give you a discount, like 50% off on Pride Month, 50% off because it's Women's Day. Are you joking? I mean, just be honest. I think people would appreciate that so much more, right?
I think it's just people and companies and brands trying to make themselves look like they care. But ultimately, see, it's all down to presence, right? Because see, if you are in a business without any self-serving purpose, then you are a non-profit at the end of the day. So even when social entrepreneurs claim that they make very little money out of social issue related ventures, I don't only look at money. I also look at how it serves yourself and clears your conscience and helps you sleep better at night. If you're also doing something for that purpose, yes, it is still self-serving. You can't just say, hey, listen, मैं इतना कम पैसा बना रहा हूँ इसमें therefore. No, you are serving yourself either financially or emotionally or making yourself feel better because you want to be associated with a cause that you otherwise wouldn't stand to care for, just to make yourself look more presentable and appealing to your consumers or people around. You are literally not trying to, you're trying to play a role and get something out of it. In that sense, everything is self-serving, right? So um, if you are an entrepreneur and if you are in it, if you are a proper entrepreneur, you're making money and pleasure out of it, right? My thing is this: you can focus more on one or the other. You can say, I'm gonna sell something I don't particularly consume myself and make a ton of money, right? Or you can say, I'm gonna make something I like, make little money, but still make that money, but be happy because I'm serving the kind of people, the kind of stuff I want. And that's what keeps MSMEs going. That's the kind of behavior that keeps MSMEs going. That's the kind of behavior that keeps the informal sector also running, because a lot of people culturally want products and services that are personalized and localized. And in that regard, when you serve something that is from the heart to that particular culture, you may not make a ton of money. Like, I was recently talking to a brand who makes a bunch of products that are only sort of relevant to a particular state in the Northeast. Only in that state do you find that particular food product. And they are trying to ship it out to the rest of India because they realize that there is a lot of that particular community staying outside that particular state as well, and they want to reach out to them. And to them, it's not about the marketing budget, or it's not about the e-commerce budget that they've got. It's all about reaching out to that community and making that product available to all of them, right? This is the kind of behavior that is also very self-serve. You feel like you are doing your part and you get satisfaction and you sleep better at it. But if you're not chasing money, you are chasing something else, but they both come under the whole self-serving sort of category. So every entrepreneur gets something out of it. It's just how much more money you want versus how much more you'd like to connect. Sometimes there's not even a versus, sometimes it goes hand in hand. That's a match made in heaven. So it's just one of those.
Absolutely. And I love the direction that this is going in, and I definitely want to ask you more questions. But I think we still have to talk about your YouTube channel and the game show.
Yeah.
So, is that part of the events, or do you consider that to be like a separate thing on its own? Because you said that um, you're now into content creation, right? So, do you consider that to be you um, fragmenting off of that events thing, or is that going hand in hand?
So here's a few things I want to put out there, right? I watch a lot of YouTube for my own good. I watch small content creators, big content creators, anything that's trending, anything that I think may be trending, and so on. Enough to know that in the 10, 12 years that I've been consuming content on YouTube, what may be the next best thing, without consciously focusing on, okay, maybe I will sort of start my own channel one day and then have to do this. So for me, the transgression was very natural in terms of being able to understand what kind of content will sell. Because when you've been in that loop for 10, 12 years, you know which way the trajectory is going. Um, Having said that, I was slightly hesitant when I started the channel because my purpose was simply to make the most of uh, the people I had met in this whole entrepreneurship journey. There are so many young, old, and so many like experienced, new, all kinds of people trying to get into so many different fields. Um, and I again didn't want it to be a situation where I'm just attacking one particular niche and saying, okay, this is only for the channel for entrepreneurs, or this is a channel for financial intelligence, or this is a channel for how to get into the service industry, anything of that sort. I wanted to do something very simple, okay, not complex at all. I just want people to listen to stories of people that have become successful. Khatam. I didn't want anything complex. Here's a story. Let me help this person get it out. That was how the whole thing started. So I had friends who were entrepreneurs, who were very well established models, actors, so on and so forth. And I was like, I tell us your story. Like that was literally how everything would be. And that's where the name of the channel came, Orbata. And I was considering a bunch of other names. Uh, like one of them was Sid and Friends. But then I was like, no, that's just too no. I don't want to put myself out there that much. It's more about the people that come on the channel. It's more about their experiences and how their experiences can be elevated and brought to everyone else. Um, that's where it started for me. And I sincerely felt like if I didn't get these people's stories out, and if I didn't use this time to be able to do that, right, and try to do it on a platform that I absolutely love and I completely understand, because if there's any scope of revenue, there it is, right? So then for me that just made all the more sense, and that's when I got everyone onto the same platform. If you guys are wondering who my friends are, please go to my YouTube channel. देख लो सारे ही दोस्त भरे पड़े हैं वहाँ पे. It's just one of those things where um, you know I started my relationship with someone through the channel. Got together, did the
Wait,
whole
wait.
game show.
No, we
That
need to know
entire
more about this. You got into a relationship through YouTube?
oh,
Hold
I
up.
did, and it's weird because so I'll tell you what happened, right? So I had a friend who was my senior back in school, and we got her on the channel, and we started talking about her journey, and we got to talking after that. You know, turns out she was pretty much the kind of person I wanted to be with. So that's where it started for me, and ultimately creatively it was a very great sort of, because the vibe was exactly there. So that's where we're at right now, and we started the whole game show after that, because I was like, listen, you're hilarious, you need to be on the channel a lot more. So she's like, yeah, okay. So then that's how we started the whole game show, and we co-hosted it, and then we took the game show to the employee engagement module and so on. So for me, the channel has just been, honestly, it's been a great utilization of time away from everything, right? Um, and I'm so happy I live in a time where I'm able to get myself out there, uh, in a way that people that appreciate it would like to come and see. And people understand that there are other modes of communication and there are other ways of reaching out to people, and that was just amazing for me. And I got a bunch of consulting gigs out of the channel as well. Like when I was doing the channel, I had a lot of companies come to me and and ask me to help them with sales, marketing, business development, and so on. The reason it came so naturally to me, Sneh, was because I felt marketing is nothing but sales uh, with an assault rifle. Because honestly, like when you're doing sales, it's almost always like a sniper situation, because you've got your eyes on the target, you're molding your pitch according to that particular target, and then you shoot. But marketing is literally guerrilla warfare, right? Because you're selling to so many people out there who may or may not be interested. It's almost always uh, like trying to be the town crier, right? And trying to sell being the town crier. Not always the best at, but the people that appreciate what you do will come and engage in and be invested in your product or service. Um, so sales and marketing were never divorced from each other to me, and I took that to mean I knew a little bit about consumer behavior and I understood the platform. Let's do it, and it blew up, and it was great. Um, I learned a lot of things on the way to be able to take that to the next level, because without the knowledge of keywords, without SEO, without understanding features of YouTube, without going through the whole YouTube Creator Academy course, you wouldn't understand that. And then to be uh, chosen to be one of the creators at the FanFest, which happened online and things like that, that was very, reassuring, and that kept me going on the right track. Sneh, let me also take this platform to say, I know I haven't been posting. I'm taking a tiny bit of a break. I'm coming back. So that's the whole idea. We do have a lot of ideas in the pipeline for the channel as well. It's just that with so many different revenue streams opening up through the channel, and so many tangible benefits that I've had because of the channel, not only through the money that I make on YouTube, but also through all the other ventures that I've gotten into because of it, I feel like it was totally worth it. And honestly, when I started it, I did think of reaching out to people and opening up other revenue streams, but it was more in the self branding and in the digital branding sort of way, and not in people actually reaching out to me and acknowledging my expertise in the fields that I'm good at. But the fact that people understood it, the fact that people related with the content, and the fact that people then went on to trust me, knowing I know what's best, was a huge, huge, huge validation check. Being on a platform like YouTube, which is so cutthroat in terms of how the algorithm works and how consumer behaviors can change based on that, and sometimes how consumer behavior can also affect the algorithm. I feel like it's very, very important for creators to constantly ask themselves what's the point, uh, simply to validate themselves through the eyes of their audience. So that's the whole YouTube journey for me. Still ongoing. And yeah, a lot of work. It's just reached to a point where I would like to put out content that I know 100% is going to sort of be the next big thing. So I'm gearing up for it, to be very honest, and doing it to the earliest. So yeah.
That's amazing. I think you answered every one of my follow-up questions that I had about
Sorry, I
YouTube.
don't know why I
No,
keep
I
getting.
love it, right? I love that. So I think that given all of the information that you've told me, I think I also understand where you want to take this, right? And thank you for using this platform to let your subscribers know that you're taking a break. Breaks are important, right?
Guys,
Obviously.
like, share, subscribe this video. A big see. Thank you.
Thank you
Yeah.
for that. So yeah, I love that you've shared your journey, and I definitely want to do another follow-up and then talk about all of your learnings from YouTube and how you've been marketing all of that. But for now, unfortunately, I have to say goodbye because my battery is dying.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and more power to you, Sneh, for doing this. All the viewers, thank you so much, and I hope you enjoyed this little chat that we had. Hoping for great content to come on this channel. Cheers.